Is your cold making it hard for you to get to sleep and leading to a bad morning? Switch to Mucinex Night Shift for fast, powerful, nighttime multi-symptom cold and flu relief. Mucinex Night Shift fights your worst nighttime symptoms to help you get to sleep and wake up ready to go. Mucinex Night Shift. It's comeback season. Use as directed.
Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your Divorce Survival Guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back. And now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm super excited today because I get to talk with my dear friend, Erin Levine. She is the founder and CEO of Hello Divorce. And today we're talking about the future of no-fault divorce and why the push to get rid of no-fault divorce is really terrifying, especially for women. No-fault divorce has helped women leave unsafe marriages. When no-fault divorce was first enacted, rates of suicide and domestic violence for women decreased dramatically. The GOP very much wants to repeal and restrict no-fault divorce. If they had their way, they would eliminate it altogether, which, as we talk about in this episode, may not be as simple as they would like to believe, but it's a really scary prospect, and it sets us back so far. So, Erin Levine is not your typical attorney. She's got over a decade of experience in litigating complex family matters. And then she saw the need for a kinder, easier, and more affordable pathway out of marriage and into the next chapter of life. She created and founded Hello Divorce, which is a venture capital-backed, tech-enabled platform that combines self-service online tools with integrated expert advice, making it easier for everyone to navigate their lives and finances with less stress and mess. Hello Divorce is available in a number of states. It is being continually sort of rolled out in more and more states. It is one of my top recommendations for navigating divorce without a lot of mess and fuss and conflict. They have amazing mediators and coaches and all sorts of professionals that are available right on the platform. So highly recommend. If you look it up, you can see if it's available in your state. Like I said, it's available in many states, and she's just continuing to roll them out in every state because divorce laws in every state are so different. It's important for her platform to fully support the process in each state individually. Anyway, I digress. The conversation today is about your divorce, your choice. And this whole series has been about the importance of your vote in this election, because women's rights in particular are really on the chopping block. So I just want to encourage you all to get out and vote. Please make your voices heard. I want to remind you that your voice is, and your vote is completely private. No one can see who you voted for. When you go to the ballot box, that is your time. Nobody can go in with you. If you're voting by mail, you can do it in the bathroom and then seal it on up. This is yours. This is your voice. This is your vote, and nobody can tell you how to do it. So, your vote, your choice. Your divorce, your choice. Your body, your choice. Today we're talking about your divorce, your choice, with my guest, Erin Levine. Erin, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation on the podcast. You and I have emailed and sort of discussed this a little bit, but we have not hit record. So I'm pretty stoked about it.
Yeah, me too. It's definitely been something that you and I, along with so many people in our community, have been talking about, emailing about, all of that stuff. So I'm glad we get a chance to really break it down today.
So, okay. So the first question I have for you, by the way, we first started this conversation when I sent you a panicked email, panicking about this. So let's talk about, first of all, let's start with what is no-fault divorce? How does it differ from fault-based divorce? And why does this matter to us as women in particular?
Oh gosh. Okay. You might have to remind me of the latter half of the question, but let's talk about first, what is it? So no-fault divorce actually began in California in 1970 when Ronald Reagan signed it into law. And so California was the first no-fault divorce state. And what it did was say that we could divorce for virtually any reason. Irreconcilable differences was enough. You no longer had to prove misconduct. But to understand no fault is to understand that every single state has a different rule and laws around divorce. So it took a little while, but by the 1980s, most states had adopted no-fault divorce. And now all states have at least no-fault options, though some still retain fault-based alternatives, meaning sometimes you can choose to go the fault-based route, which I'm hoping that after we chat about it today, nobody will actually choose that route because it's very, very rarely gets the result that you would want. Why it became so important is because prior to no-fault divorce, the domestic violence rates and the female suicide rates were higher than they'd ever been. In fact, we saw a massive reduction once no-fault divorce law came into place. It's not perfect by any means, but what it did was it made it a lot easier for victims, survivors, to leave unsafe marriages without proving fault. So it's hard enough to leave. Oftentimes, you know the stat better than I do, but it's something like 7 times that you try to leave on average before you actually are successful, if you're successful.
Yes.
Because intimate partner abuse is so high. But having that additional barrier of having to prove that your partner was fault, which, as we all know, abuse happens behind closed doors. It is not easy to prove. Made it really, really challenging and made it so that people had to stay in these really awful, awful marriages.
Yes. And, it's so hard for us to be believed to begin with. Right. Yeah. And then you try to actually bring it to a court of law saying well, I deserve to get a divorce from this person because he hit me. Oh, well, did you report it? Did you take evidence, photographic evidence? Did you how much do you have to prove? I'm unsafe. It's already hard enough for us to be believed as victims.
It's already hard enough. And then you have these fault-based divorce laws because the state wants to discourage divorce. Right. So you're already at an uphill battle when you walk into that public courtroom. And there's other reasons why you wouldn't necessarily want to try to prove abuse or adultery, right? You don't necessarily want your kids exposed to bitter blame games. And you want to reduce that emotional strain. You understand that you're going to be parenting with this person forever. You maybe want to save on legal fees. Imagine if you were spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars just trying to prove that there is abuse so that you could ultimately start the divorce proceedings.
It's insanity. And, just to be clear too, for anyone who was like, wait, Ronald Reagan, he did this? He did it because his first wife divorced him and said all sorts of negative shit about him that was then in the public record. And that's why he wanted no fault divorce, because he didn't want stuff like that in the public record, right? He didn't think people should have to go through that. And he also said it was one of his biggest regrets as governor was instating this law. So,
oh my goodness, I had no idea. Well, I mean, I wonder if he were alive today, if he would feel the same way. And the reason is because the divorce rates shot up after no-fault divorce was initiated, but then they leveled off. So no-fault doesn't necessarily make people want to go out and get divorced. It's just initially, when they created this law, people who had been stuck in these really awful marriages for many, many, many years went out and filed. Another, big reason why fault-based is a problem is because a lot of times these relationships have one bread earner, and at least during the marriage, and that person is providing for the family, especially the children. And if you have a fault-based proceeding that's public record, that could easily end up in that spouse being fired from their job. So maybe you got out of your marriage, but you ended up in a situation where there's no ongoing income.
Yeah. Oh, that would suck. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
That would suck, right? Because it is. And this is the other reason, like, you want to keep it out of the public record for your kids. Like, there's stuff that we shouldn't have to, it shouldn't have to be this way. It shouldn't have to be, we say terrible, horrible things about somebody because we have to get divorced. And also it sort of made people create allegations, right? And also say things that weren't necessarily truthful because that was the only way to do it.
Yeah, talk about pitting spouse against spouse. You have to make your spouse into a terrible human being, even if they aren't necessarily that, just to get out of marriage. And in a fault-based divorce, the spouse filing has to provide evidence of this wrongdoing. So adultery, abuse, a lot of times it was adultery, but as we all know, sometimes that's just the straw that broke their camel's back. That's not the real or main reason why somebody is getting divorced. And so to have to focus everything on that affair, it's re-triggering, it's traumatizing, and it's not what a lot of these people, especially women, wanted. They wanted out. They didn't necessarily want to, throw their partner under the bus. But if they were able to prove, then on the flip side, it would oftentimes, but not always, influence factors like spousal support, how long, how much, property division, child custody. And, a spouse who's found at fault, they may have received a smaller share of marital assets, although it didn't generally turn out that way because there are defenses like forgiveness and both spouses being at fault. Well, yeah, I did something really bad, but I'm going to tell the court all the ways that you were a terrible spouse.
Right. Nightmare. Nightmare upon nightmare upon nightmare. So in these states that still have these fault clauses, when and why would someone utilize those?
Well, a lot of times they won't, right? Because fault is such an uphill battle, even if they are a victim. And especially when perpetrators have a lot more financial power, which is often, if not nearly always, the case. Well, there's a couple different fault-based divorce systems that still exist. Okay.
Yeah.
So have you heard of covenant marriages?
Yes, I have. Let's talk about that. What is that? Tell our listeners.
So for those of you who don't know, I was a lawyer, have been a lawyer for 20 years before founding Hello Divorce. I practiced in the state of California, although we served, a wide range of states. So I've never handled covenant marriages, but I've learned a little bit about them through my years. And an option in a few states still today, where couples can agree to more stringent requirements if they were to divorce. So they enter into a covenant marriage and they say, if we ever get divorced, it's going to be really, really hard. The idea is to discourage divorce, make it a lot harder to dissolve their marriage.
Which, by the way, it doesn't need to be any harder than it is.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. God.
It's so hard. I mean, taking out the emotional and financial and logistical challenges, you've got a process that on average takes 12 to 18 months and costs easily $20,000 per person. It is hard. No fault divorce, let's be clear, did not make divorce easy.
Right.
It just took out another massive impediment. Okay.
Right. So covenant marriages.
Covenant marriages. So these are states like Louisiana, Arizona, Arkansas, and what it requires in some of these states are undergoing premarital counseling and agreeing to very limited grounds for divorce, like adultery, abuse, or felony convictions.
Oh, that's nice of them.
If you enter into a covenant marriage, no fault divorce isn't an option. And while they're rarely used, we definitely have seen people come to our site that have entered into them, and there's no turning back.
There's no turning back from a covenant marriage.
Yes, meaning you can't therefore now have a no-fault divorce. Like if you are in a covenant marriage, like it is going to be very, very challenging for you to exit.
Wow. Okay. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side, we're going to continue to talk about the difficulty of, and why and when you would file for a fault divorce, which we're hoping nobody will do. But we'll be right back. Have you ever wanted to learn a new language for travel, career, or just to enjoy your favorite foreign films and shows? Me too. But those old textbook methods never really worked for me. That's why I'm excited to share Rosetta Stone, the most trusted language learning program for over 30 years. With 25 languages like Spanish, French, Japanese, and more, Rosetta Stone fully immerses you. No English translations. You will start to think, listen, and speak naturally. And with their true accent speech recognition, you get real-time feedback. So it's like having a personal coach helping you perfect your pronunciation. It's also super flexible. You can learn anytime, anywhere with the app or on your desktop. Plus, you get lifetime access to all 25 languages, which is perfect for any future trips or language goals. Don't put off learning that language. There is no better time than right now to get started. Divorce Survival Guide podcast listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/DSG today. That is 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/DSG today.
Hi there, I'm Andrea Owen, self-help author with 19 translations of my books, global keynote speaker, and life coach. My podcast, Make Some Noise, has been serving up self-help in a simple-to-digest way for the last decade. The topics brought in each episode are practical and easy to implement around topics such as working through fears that keep you stuck, different modalities of therapy, managing your negative self-talk, and more. We bring you guest experts, solo episodes, and I even coach listeners on the air around relatable struggles. I also do my best to weave my sense of humor into some heavy topics because, let's face it, life can be pretty hard, and it's so much better when we can have some fun while walking through our challenges. Whether you're seasoned in personal development or just starting out, Make Some Noise podcast will help you become the best version of yourself, the person you're proud of when you look in the mirror and show up in your life. Simply search Make Some Noise with Andrea Owen wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about covenant marriages. So in a covenant marriage, you have to file for fault divorce. Like that's the deal. When else and why else would someone theoretically or either file or be drawn to file for fault?
Yeah, well, I think when you've been wronged, especially through something as hurtful as cheating or abuse, it's natural to want justice, especially when you come into your own power. it would make sense. Like, oh, okay, they are getting punished for doing something really terrible to me and or my children. So I certainly understand that sentiment. But here's the thing. Fault-based divorce doesn't always give you the outcome you're hoping for. Like we discussed, proving fault requires evidence. It's emotionally exhaustive. It's legally expensive. Either you have a lawyer, who, by the way, very few lawyers do fault-based divorce, or you are doing it on your own. And if you're doing it on your own, no matter what state you are in, you are held to the same standards as lawyers. It is very, very challenging. So even if you're able to prove it, many states don't heavily factor that in to property division or child custody.
Right. So what's the point?
Well, and also, like, it's a good way, and you could talk about this for days, of focusing on everything that went wrong in your life and your marriage instead of setting yourself up for your next best chapter.
That's right. That's right. It's like at the end of the day, you get a stamp from the court that says you were right, they were wrong.
Right.
But at what cost?
At what cost? And if you're lucky, like it
and if you're
generally
lucky,
doesn't happen. Like it is very, very hard to prove these things. And again, it's public record. Like your kids could get their hands on these documents when they're an adult or even before. I've seen that happen as well. So it's not that hard anymore, unfortunately, to get some of these documents. So I think if that is what's going on in your head, I would see whether or not you might be able to use their behavior as leverage in settlement negotiations, even in a no-fault system. Like I've seen that a lot. No matter what who your judge is and what type of proceeding you have, the family courts are not there to punish spouses. Their goal is really to focus on fair division and what is in the best interest of the children. But there are certain scenarios where you can gain leverage if your spouse is really, really naughty. So as an example, if your spouse went out and racked up a ton of credit card debt, buying jewelry or taking his or her, we'll just say to make it easy, his mistress out on vacation and restaurants, then of course, like you might be able to recover that money and then some, like attorney's fees.
Right. Right. And that would really be one of the only times I think that it would be, if it would really, really affect the outcome favorably for you. Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and when you see this outpouring of support for fault-based divorce, it is not to make the divorce process more fair. It is not to ensure, they never say it's like to ensure that the wronged spouse gets all the orders and everything that they deserve. Like that is not the reason why they are pushing for it.
So one of the reasons we're having this conversation, and one of the reasons that I emailed you in a panic, was that the GOP is really in favor of eliminating no-fault divorce. And so you said, like, when they're advocating for fault divorce, really what they're advocating for is the elimination of no-fault divorce, right? And it's not about having a better outcome. It is like, so what is the reasoning that these people give for supporting and wanting fault divorce over no fault?
They want to keep their spouses in the marriage. They want to limit the autonomy of women and how we walk through the world.
About 70% of divorces are initiated by women. So,
and in college educated women, it's 85 to 90% of the time as well. So women are filing. If you look at a lot of these people that are pushing hard for fault-based divorce, it's because their spouse filed or they were what they'll say dragged through a really, really messy divorce. But what they say, just as an example, I think most of us know about the JD Vance's, comments that have resurfaced that he said in 2022, where he said, people have gotten used to swapping spouses like they changed their underwear, resulting in a lot of very, very real family dysfunction that's making our kids unhappy. That to me is so wrong.
It's just so blatant. Yeah.
It's so blatant. It's like, how can you expect that keeping kids in a home where one or both spouses are miserable, taking out the possibility of abuse, let's just say a home where, not every marriage is meant for till death do you part, and expecting them to stay in their marriage and model that kind of relationship with themselves and their partners for their children is going to be healthier than two happy homes.
Right. Well, and it's also, nobody's swapping their marriages like they're fucking underwear. Like that is not what's happening.
Right. That's not what's happening.
Like literally that's not what's happening. The idea that no fault divorce it makes it so easy, going back to our initial point at the top of the show, that it makes it so easy to get divorced that you can just sort of, wake up one day and just decide you're done. And then that is not what happens. Most people who get divorced have been agonizing over this for an average of 2 years. Most people that I know have been agonizing over it for like 4 to 5. This is not something that anybody takes lightly. Nobody fucking wants this.
No one wakes up in the morning and says, I want a divorce, and then goes out and files it and it's done the next day. Like, this is a very considered decision. And our research, our polls that we've done with thousands of people on Instagram and with our own clientele really match up with what you're saying. Most people on average are trying to save their marriage, considering it, thinking about it, agonizing over it for 2 to 5 years before they file. Not longer, but that is our average.
Right.
I like, at least like with the National Center for Men, this a men's rights group, at least they tell us what it is, why they want no fault divorce to go away. And they say it's because no fault divorce has become a disaster for men, since most breakups are initiated by women.
Oh, well, at least they're right. At least they're honest. Yep,
at least they're honest, right?
Right. It's not, hey, men, we need to work harder at how we're showing up in our relationships. It's let's eliminate the out that they have so that they can't keep doing this to us.
Right. Because that always works, right? Exerting more control and fear and making people feel shameful about their decisions is always really helpful to our society.
Exactly. And as you said, when women didn't have this option, there were higher rates of suicide.
Yeah.
Right.
And domestic violence.
And domestic violence, because our only way out for some women, the only way out was death. We would rather die than stay married to you.
Yeah. Like literally the domestic violence rates dropped after no fault divorce was instituted, but also female suicide, like dramatically enough that there are so many studies on it. Mm-hmm. No fault divorce makes women safer.
They say that they don't want no fault divorce because they're tired of us leaving them.
Yeah.
They're not interested in why we're leaving them. They don't want us to leave them. They want to make it harder. And like everything else, they want power and control over our autonomy.
That's right. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing. So in Florida and Texas, we're seeing them flirt with efforts to change marital laws. They're promoting covenant marriages a lot more. Not really gaining a lot of widespread traction. I like to call it panic porn. We are seeing these everywhere in articles and magazines, and it's definitely something that's up for people. But I think that it's, really, and you might disagree, highly unlikely that we're going to see, these no fault divorce laws clawed back. Primarily because if you look at the stats, if you look at how people feel about no fault divorce, it's like unanimous across party lines that 70% of people across party lines support no fault divorce. So it makes any effort to overturn it, it's going to be unpopular and very politically tricky. And if you look at polling from like YouGov, you'll see something like 66% of Americans oppose making divorce harder to obtain. And even religious communities, the majority say publicly that they don't want the divorce restrictions tightened.
Okay. So I was going to say that most people, not across party lines necessarily, and not necessarily across in the political spectrum, right? But they feel the same way about abortion, right? Like most people actually want access to abortion, but that didn't stop them from getting rid of it. We're going to take another quick break. And on the other side of the break, I want to come and talk to you about, when I panic emailed you and was like, help, they're going to do this thing. And you talked me off the ledge because we talked about how you sort of educated me on how politically difficult it was actually going to be to do.
Yeah.
So I want to break that down after the break.
No one told us the truth about parenthood. Why? This is the podcast everyone needed before they had kids, because now that those little ones are here, there is a lot to unpack. I'm Rachel Shepardota, and I am your host for the podcast No One Told Us, where we tell the truth about parenting and let you in on all the stuff you really should have known about before having kids. I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby, but this podcast is so much more than sleep. We'll be diving into all the topics that you really care about and need to know while you do your best job raising those adorable, tiny humans. Our goal is to just make you feel less alone and less overwhelmed. There are so many things that no one tells us before becoming a parent, and I think that we should really pull back the curtain on becoming a first-time or second-time mom or dad to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have a little education, a little fun, and a whole lot of heart that goes into each and every episode. So join me and our amazing guests each week to hear us talk about what no one told us.
Lynn, this time of year, parenting can be such a flusterclux.
You've come to the right place. I'm Lynn Lyons, and I've been treating anxious families for over 30 years.
I'm Lynn's sister-in-law and co-host Robin Hudson.
Join us for Flusterclux, a podcast for parents who worry.
Wait, that's everybody.
Yeah, these last few years have felt like one long anxiety attack for so many.
Why do you think parents are always surprised that a podcast about anxiety relates to them, even if no one in their house has an anxiety disorder?
Well, worry is human. Everyone does it. And anxiety shows up when we face uncertainty.
All the parenting tips you've taught me have been essential.
I love to break it down into skills we need to manage worry in our families.
We've covered so many topics: depression, burnout, meltdowns, perfectionism.
Don't forget scary mothers-in-law.
Right, but of course that's not my mother-in-law.
Because that's my mother.
And a listener.
As a psychotherapist, I like to teach parents and kids how to respond to everyday moments in healthy ways.
Managing anxiety really can be taught.
It really can. And I'll even tell you what to say.
We talk about serious stuff, but without being too serious.
Anxiety wants everything serious. Anxiety doesn't stand a chance when we're laughing, even about the tough stuff.
Okay, we are back, and we're going to talk now about how hard it would actually be to change these divorce laws across all the states, repeal no-fault divorce entirely. Help us not panic, Erin.
Okay. Well, I mean, one thing that helps no fault a lot is that family law is a state-by-state thing. So any changes that would need to happen would have to be on a state-by-state basis. I can't imagine a nationwide rollback happening. It would have to be on a state level. Our political and personal autonomy are protected, and just due to how family law is structured, it would have to be a state-by-state thing.
You've got the states that are already like, let's do this, right? Would it have to be voted on? Like, how does it work? I mean, because, we're rolling back abortion rights in every state, right? We're leaving it up to the states now, and the states are like, okay.
Right. But so you have to ask yourself, like, why? Why would they bring something that is so controversial and for the most part widely accepted across all of their constituents in front of the legislature? Like, they'd have to, like, every state has a different way for passing laws. Why would they prioritize that? And nobody has. Like, we've seen a few very loud voices, but we haven't seen any unified political push. So we've seen a lot of Republicans talking about it, a lot of noise, but we also know that there isn't a unified stance on this for Republicans. The changing of the law would be a really tough sell. There isn't any party that's adopted a policy recommending to eliminate no fault. So they would really be standing on their own.
I mean, I don't trust it because I would have thought the same thing about abortion, but here we are. So I'm still a little like, yeah.
Abortion has always been controversial.
Yeah.
No fault divorce has really been like a legal and a cultural norm since the 70s.
Right. Right.
And it's deeply embedded into our legal and social fabric. It only gets stronger with every year. We are seeing a massive trend towards divorces that aren't those really ugly, messy, terrible divorces that they all used to be.
Right. We have that is true. I mean, I will agree with you there that there is definitely since, Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow, God bless them, started the trend of that we really have done this conscious uncoupling as much as we can, the system still kind of favors a little bit of, or the people who are profiting off of the system will still favor a little bit of contention and combativeness. But overall, we have a fairly strong cultural understanding that divorce is something that we can just do. If no fault divorce were to be eliminated, right, or restricted in some way, what kind of legal and social consequences would we see? Do you imagine? Let's just like worst case scenario, this actually happens.
I definitely think we'd see domestic violence, female suicide, mental health issues rise, just like we saw them drop when no-fault divorce became the mainstay.
Mm-hmm.
We would see legal fees rise dramatically. We would see a huge rollback of all the work that you and I and our community have done over the last several years to change how we think about and do divorce. We, especially as women, some of the biggest emotions that we feel before, during, and after divorce is shame and overwhelm and guilt. And these are things that we have now worked so hard to help people have the tools and the self-knowingness to be able to move past it so that they truly can empower a better life ahead. And a big concern I have is, how people will feel going through the divorce process. How you feel is almost more important than what orders you get, because it can dictate what that next chapter looks like. And we have to be worried about damage control. We have to be focused on financial and emotional resiliency. All of that is so incredibly important. A rollback of these divorce laws would affect everyone's autonomy, really, and how we walk through the world.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Sounds fun. Sounds amazing.
Really good.
Let's make people more unsafe. Let's take away their rights. I would go so far as to argue that there's a constitutional right to divorce, in the same way that there's personal autonomy, the right to marry whoever you want to marry. There's all these laws that clearly protect marriage, any race, any gender, any of that kind of stuff. So to then, in the same way that you have the right to contract into a relationship, I would argue that you do in fact have that same right. You have to have that same right to exit a relationship as well.
Recently on the podcast, I had Mona Sinha on to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment and how that is not actually enshrined in our Constitution. But if it were, and this is part of why it's not, if it were to be enshrined into our Constitution, because it has been ratified by 38 states, and so it should have been automatically certified, it's another thing that the ERA would actually protect against. Our ability to choose. But since we don't have that constitutional right, but I like the idea that legally, if you have a right to opt in, you also have a right to opt out.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting legal argument.
I'm inferring it. There isn't actually the right to get divorced, but I would argue that there is. And that if we lose that, because they make it more challenging or they bring back fault-based divorce, then we should all be watching Handmaid's Tale, because that's exactly where we're headed.
That's exactly right. So how can people at this point, how do we advise women in particular to sort of move forward? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen?
How do we ensure it doesn't happen to us? We have to vote. We have to get out there and we have to make our voice count. And we need to tell stories when and if we're ready about what would have happened if you didn't have no-fault divorce available to you. So I know someone who had a substantiated child abuse case against their ex, including criminal charges. She had restraining order violations, but the judge and other professionals were still pushing for him to have 50-50 child custody.
Sure, of course.
With no-fault divorce, it would only get worse. In fact, she could lose custody altogether for making a big stink about him being problematic.
She could now, but it would be even more so. Yeah.
Without no-fault divorce, it would, it could get so much worse. And this is what we're dealing with. We are dealing with the fact that the system was built at a time when divorce was illegal and then became legal, but immoral. And the laws haven't changed that much since. So we do have no-fault divorce, but there's a lot of problems with divorce and family laws in general. So losing that one piece that is our beacon of light that allows us to exit relationships without spending, for the most part, years and years and years in litigation would be the single worst thing we can do when it comes to family law. So we've got to tell our stories. We have to vote. We have to be really vigilant.
Do you know how other developed nations with better divorce laws, how they actually do it? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? In most developed nations.
I wouldn't say most developed nations. It's really problematic. I've talked to people in Australia. I've talked to people in Japan. There are some we do hear that there are some countries that are definitely a lot more straightforward. You know what to expect. I mean, part of the problem, right, is that with our laws, we have a lot of discretion around, the judges have a lot of discretion on, how they can interpret facts and what they might order. There's less room for that in certain countries. It's very clear, but for the most part, it is problematic across the board.
Interesting. It's just the more that I think about this and the more that we talk about this, it's just, to me, our divorce laws, our marriage laws, right, were written at a time when women were property. And that is sort of, to me, the whole evolution of this process has been giving women choice, because it's mostly us that are filing. And that is the biggest threat to, especially, Republican men. Sorry, just going to say it, right? Their biggest threat, because they don't seem to have a lot of room to look at, what is the problem? Why are women so unhappy in their marriages?
Right.
Right. We're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to make it so you can't leave. Right. And so, because we're going to, right, Handmaid's Tale. You're our property. There's still this sense that we are property.
And that, you enter into a contract that you don't really understand the terms and what marriage will look like, and you are bound by it for the rest of your life, no matter what happens. How is that American? How is that that's not modern times at all.
Right. That's not freedom.
Definitely not freedom.
Erin, is there anything else that you want women to know about this issue and fault-based versus no-fault divorce?
If we haven't convinced you that no-fault divorce is a better option over covenant marriage or fault-based divorce, then we want to hear from you. We want to understand what it is that you're thinking, where you're getting your information, and what is it that we haven't considered.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So where can people get in touch with you, and where can people find you and all that you do?
So you can find my company and myself at Hello Divorce. We're very active on Instagram, and you can also email Erin, ERIN, at hellodivorce.com.
Amazing. It's true. We do. We want to hear from you. If you really think that this is good, that eliminating no fault divorce is something that should be considered, I am curious what your reasoning would be, certainly after listening to this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I haven't heard one cognizant argument. Like, I haven't heard yet one real argument as to why it makes sense. And what we do know is safer exits for women, reduce domestic violence, protects children, boosts women's financial independence. When women can move on faster and avoid these long, legal, ugly battles, it's better for co-parenting when there's less hostility. It's smoother transitions when you don't need to throw your spouse under the bus and say everything that has ever gone wrong in the hope that maybe the court will let you get divorced.
Right.
It removes gender bias by no longer forcing women to justify leaving unhappy marriages. And it streamlines divorce in that it paved the way for companies like mine to help make divorce quicker, easier, cheaper, still a bear, but a little bit easier during a really challenging life transition. So help me understand the other side.
Erin, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation. It's really important.
Thank you. Anytime.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time. And until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.